People with autism are not broken or damaged in any way, are intellectually very gifted or very smart, right? But socially, there's a lot of challenges. So misdiagnosed or just missed diagnosed. And the stereotypical view of autism was based purely in how males presented. Typically, services are more easily accessed and accessed earlier by boys compared to girls. I'm autistic. Unfortunately, there's a lot of internalized guilt and shame.
Welcome back to another episode of Teens No Cap. I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I'm a teen mental health specialist, and we are here today to talk to you a little bit about autism in girls. This podcast is solely exclusively about teens, focused on teens for providers, for parents. We want to give you the best information so that you can help either your teen or your clients. We are non-discriminating. So today, I'm very, very excited. I have an amazing guest here to talk with us about autism in teen girls. So, guest, Tabitha, would you give us the kindest introduction you can?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Charity. So my name is Tabitha Hapeman. I'm a nurse practitioner. I specialize in neurodivergence and women's health. I opened up my own practice this year to really specialize in those populations that I truly love serving, and I'm so excited to talk about autism specifically in teens and in girls.
Obviously, autism can be really impactful. Having a diagnosis or being misdiagnosed is a huge part of, I think, sometimes working with teens in general, but also when we're talking neurodivergent populations. So autism in teen girls, I think, is especially under discussed. A lot of times when we're talking about autism in teens, we're talking about presentations that are typically masculine based, right? But we know that autism in teens presents its own unique challenges and is a huge opportunity for us to make sure they have the right supports that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. The way it presents is very different, right? So girls, we know from research and statistics, girls tend to present with things like special interests that are more socially acceptable. And so they may not even be labeled as a special interest, right? So the stereotype of a special interest in autism is something like trains or dinosaurs, right? We see that all the time. And there's even memes like, how did you know your great uncle was autistic? Well, him and his train collection, right? And it's very common. But in girls, what we'll see is something a lot more socially acceptable, like animals, horses, right? Like, oh, she's a horse girly. And we don't think anything of it. We don't even conceptualize it as a special interest. And so girls tend to fly a little bit more under the radar, where we'll think like, oh, that's just her hobby. That's just her, something she enjoys doing. But we don't conceptualize it the same way as we would. The same thing with social interactions. Girls tend to mask a lot better. Girls tend to pick up on how they're supposed to interact in social interactions, and they mimic from a very young age. They may not actually understand why we have to do this back and forth, right? And why small talk is the thing that we do, but they engage in it because they have picked up on it from a very young age. And so a lot of things in girls can be much more subtle, right? Even the stereotyped movement. Some girls, instead of flapping their hands, they're constantly doing something like this, right? And this is something like, oh, when you see someone doing that, they're just fixing their hair, right? Or they just flip their hair a lot. But for that person, that might be their stereotyped movement. That might be their stim. And so it's very different in how it presents in girls, which leads to your original point of misdiagnosis and missed diagnoses.
So one of my, myth or facts, kind of teaser, is really wondering if you're listening, wondering if your teen daughter's social withdrawal or any of the things you're noticing might be something more than just adolescence.
Absolutely. Some adolescence is challenging for everyone, right? It is a very challenging period of time where we're going through significant self-discovery, figuring out our boundaries, a lot of self-definition, right? It's a fairly existential period of time, right? There can be, we don't really talk about existential crises in adolescence, but that's kind of what it is, right? When we really look at it, it's an existential crisis of who am I? How do I belong in the world? How do I want to exist in the world? That is so much bigger if you have underlying neurodivergence, right? It's harder to even answer some of those questions because that relationship with self and that level of introspection may not have occurred. We may not even understand ourselves, right? How do you define self if you are undiagnosed neurodivergence and you don't even know, right, that you're autistic, and why some things are challenging for you and seem easy for other people, right? So there's a big question there. So a lot of teens can be moody, withdrawn, right? And some of that is on a spectrum of normalcy. We kind of expect a little bit of that. But there's a whole other underlying level of it, I think, in neurodivergence, where it's not just I'm withdrawing, it's I'm truly uncomfortable in social situations because I don't know how to exist within them. And that is different from I'm uncomfortable right now because I just don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And so I'd like to isolate a little bit. I think there's a very different conceptualization we have to have in people that are neurodivergent.
Yes. Okay, so talk to me about some of the key differences you see between like autism in males versus autism in females.
Yeah. The presentation is very different. Statistically, we also pick up on it at a much later age, which is fascinating, right? So girls tend to be diagnosed much later because girls are so good at masking and they're so good at putting on a socially acceptable face. So in little kids, there are some similarities, right? You might see tiptoe walking. That's pretty common observation across both sexes. You'll definitely still see the repetitive motor movements, but again, they might be a lot quieter in girls, a lot more toned down, right? You'll see the special interest, but in girls, it'll be something that makes sense, right? Maybe it is Barbies or fashion or dolls, right? It's when that goes from, oh, this is something she really likes playing with, to she enjoys this at the exclusion of all other things. It's when we have to start asking some questions. Whereas boys, you will see more of the stereotype of trains, dinosaurs, the things that we kind of think about already with autism. Another big difference is in females versus males, the social aspects. Female assigned female at birth people tend to be better able to form some kind of social group or social connection. So there might still be that really intense loneliness, but sometimes we don't see that until later on in that person's teenage, life. So we'll see girls in early elementary school, even in the preteens, the tween, age group, they're still able to form those social connections, right? They're still able to have those friendships. And so it doesn't really bubble up to the surface until we start to get into the slightly more advanced teen years of like 13 to 16, where suddenly this person's oddness within their friend group or their peculiarities or their idiosyncrasies, those things suddenly become a lot louder and a lot more pronounced, right? The socialization is very challenging for boys very early on, but it's actually more challenging for girls later in the teen years, which is a fascinating juxtaposition. And it's another reason that we see so many girls, they're not diagnosed until they're in their advanced teen years.
Can you tell me about the internalized impact of being not diagnosed or misdiagnosed for an autistic teen girl?
Yeah. A lot of times we're labeled early on as like a highly sensitive person, right? Like she's so sensitive. She doesn't have, very thick skin, right? She's just a little awkward. And we really take those things of like, I'm too much, I'm too something, right? I'm too sensitive. I'm too whatever. And we internalize those things, and those things can turn into a guilt-shame spiral. And so we'll internalize like, I'm just not good with people, or, I'm too awkward, or this is too much, right? This interest of mine is too much, and so I don't tell anybody about it. And that leads to a lot of isolation, but a lot of feelings of just really low self-esteem. which can be very challenging as we get older because we'll carry that, right? We'll carry that into our adulthood. And so as we carry that into our adulthood, as you enter into new experiences, new relationships, right? If you're carrying this core belief of I am too much or I am not enough, or a really interesting combination of both of those things, right? How can you enter into healthy relationships necessarily, right? There's a predisposition, and it's why we see, again, statistically, why do female autistics have a higher likelihood of entering into, toxic relationships? Part of it is because they have that really core low self-esteem, because we've internalized these beliefs about ourselves. Because we haven't conceptualized it as, no, I'm neurodivergent, this is just something different about me. We've conceptualized it as, I have some kind of personality or character defect. And that's powerful. And I work with a lot of adult women that I diagnose in adulthood. And there's this really big grief process that they have to go through, and unpacking all of that, right? And really challenging a lot of those beliefs and preconceived notions they have about themselves. It's a big process.
Full disclosure here, right? We're not just going to diagnose someone with autism to diagnose them. I'm going to say this, but it also seems like early discovery, early diagnosis, really like naming that and labeling that could actually be a protective factor long term for those teens.
100%. I think it's very protective. It's very empowering, right? So if you're someone that you're on the autism spectrum, and because autism is at its core, right, it's a social disorder, right? It is not cognitive, it's social. And I think people tend to get those a little bit confused. If you have a really hard time with small talk, right? Like, you have to be very aware of what your face is doing and like how you're presenting and like the whole thing. And you have a script that you are using, right? And it feels very inauthentic for you. You can do it, but it feels very inauthentic. And you wonder why afterwards you're so tired, right? And you're so exhausted. If you know, like, I am on the spectrum, this is going to be inherently challenging for me, and I can make space for that. I can make a conscious decision whether I'm going to do those things. Am I going to be performative in that way, or am I not? Right? And so just that choice in and of itself can be very empowering. But to also put that challenge into perspective, right? It's not that you're, because I hear a lot of people say, like, I'm just too stupid to understand, right, socialization. You're not stupid at all. This is just a social ritual that does not make sense for your brain. Right? And so to have that knowledge of, this is a social ritual, it is frankly illogical. Everyone else seems to engage in it, and perhaps they enjoy it, perhaps they don't. I do not enjoy it. Therefore, I'm going to either limit my exposure to it, or I'm going to cultivate a very small group of friends that we can have very intimate conversations without the small talk. Or if I do have to engage in small talk at some kind of event, I'm going to build in downtime for myself afterwards. I'm going to build in self-care and rest time afterwards, right? But if you don't have that insight, you can't do any of those things, right? And so there's no self-empowerment without that insight. There is just beating ourselves up because, oh God, I put my foot in my mouth again. Or like, what were they thinking of me afterwards? Did my face look okay? Right? Did I have RBF going on, right, when I was in that moment? What do they like me, right? Though we can really go into such a negative spiral about that kind of stuff if we don't have the level of self-awareness that comes with an official diagnosis.
Right. Well, I love all of that, and I agree so much, because I think that, by the time I get some of the teens I work with, we are already combating a decade or more of like negative messaging. And so then it's really hard, because then you have parents that are struggling, you have like the kid is struggling, and you want so badly to help. And at the same time, we are not just able to like move forward, we're also doing damage control and healing old wounds, and really like trying to set the stage for a positive sense of self, and like how do we kind of manage these, and that at the end of the day they are capable. And that their brain might just need something different. And like those nuances and the difference that we have is like so beautiful, right? And there's nothing bad about it. But when we get kids, teen girls, 16 to 18, that are like, I'm a fuck up, there's something wrong with me, I'm terrible, I can't do all these things, why do I struggle so much? there's all these pieces that we then have to work through. And so it seems, there is this clinical indication almost that we really want to make sure that if we have someone coming into treatment, that we're fully assessing, not just for, like depression and anxiety, but like doing these deeper dives too, because like they deserve it.
I think you touched on so much there, the family as a unit, right? Because we can't just scaffold one person's experience. It won't work. We really have to scaffold the entire experience of the family and how we conceptualize things, right? And so one of the things that I notice that tends to be an ongoing kind of point of contention, a lot of times between mothers and daughters, when daughters are autistic, and especially if mothers are not, right? If a mom's neurotypical, is the tendency for people that are on the spectrum to feel very safe and comfortable at home. I don't really want to leave my house. All my stuff is here. I like it here. Why would I want to leave? And so neurotypical moms are like, no, we have to go places. We have to do things. If I don't give you these experiences, I'm shortchanging your childhood. Like if I don't give you these special experiences, like we have to go sit on Santa's lap and take a picture at the mall because that's what you do. If I don't do that, I'm a bad mother and you are having a bad childhood. Whereas the neurodivergent child is like, I really want to stay here. Right? That sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like a sensory overload situation. None of that sounds any fun to me. And so if we don't break down some of those things, that ongoing, just completely different perspectives of the situation, right? And neither one of them are right or wrong. They're just based on how we experience the world and our own experiences, how mom was raised as a kid. If we don't scaffold that whole family, those things, and that seems like such a small example, right? But how many moms end up in tears in the mall bathroom because their child had a meltdown when they tried to put them on Santa's lap, right? And so we've got to unpack all of this for the whole family so that everyone's on the same page of understanding and insight. And that's where we can really start to build authentic relationships where mom and daughter, right? Client and their mom, they can start having mutual experiences that work for both of them, where neither one of them feels like they have to be inauthentic to themselves in order to have the experience together.
Well, and I think you bring up such a fantastic kind of like deep point is like this idea of shoulds that we are so tied into, right? And there's so much shame. And even like I'm thinking about the teens I work with now that I'm just like, it should be really easy for me to do this. It should be really easy for me to go to.
I should like this. I should enjoy this.
It should be easy for me to like make friends at a new school, right?
Yeah.
And then the other part that happens is that you have parents who could be the most genuine, authentically trying to support it, etc., who are like also maybe even without knowing reapplying those circumstances of like, oh, it's easy to make friends, right? And it's like, okay, it's easy for you, mom or dad, because like you are a neurotypical person and you're super social and you can read all that, but like it's exhausting for me and I don't get it and I feel lost, right? Yeah. As a teen. So absolutely. I do think including the family in treatment is so critical because then you're helping to support not just the teen, but this entire scaffolding like you had talked about.
Right, because some of those should haves, could haves, and would haves are so toxic to us, right? But they're so subconscious. A lot of times it's not a conscious thought. We're not even trying to think that way. We just are, right? And so to peel back all of those, are those true? Are those actually based in objective reality, or is that a social construct? And so many of them are social constructs. And so if we acknowledge that it's a social construct, then we can make a conscious decision whether we want to follow it or not, right? And we might want to, we might not, but then we have at least the freedom to take a different path without guilt. Whereas without doing that, we have a lot of guilt if we don't do the should haves, right? Or the would haves. And guilt is it's a self-esteem killer, right? It's an emotional health killer. Like guilt is one of the core things that we have to really unpack, especially as we go through life and we get a little bit older without this level of self-insight.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like if we can help families that are dealing with an autism diagnosis, right, and working to support and kind of do better, if we can help them kind of like unburden themselves with the should, could, would, right, it's going to help them really create a space that's good, not just for like one person in their family, but everyone in their family.
For everyone. Because those burdens are heavy, right? Like they're really heavy to carry around, and they are so insidious, right? Like they just creep up and they wrap themselves around us. They're like leg weights that we don't know we're carrying, right? We don't know we're walking with them. But everything from, like my daughter should like dance class, right? And everybody else is doing the routine in the dance class, and she has isolated herself in a corner and is just like spinning, right? She's doing her own little pirouettes in the corner, and now I'm embarrassed, right? And now I have all this guilt, and I didn't really realize that's what I'm feeling, right? It's my daughter should, right? And once we can make that acknowledgement, we can really improve, the parent child relationship, which I do think is also really important for ongoing mental health, is making sure that's a healthy relationship. We can help mom unburden from those things, and we can help daughter not internalize all of those really not good shoulds, right? So for our teen clients, they're like, yeah, like, oh my God, my mom kept putting me in dance class and cheer and color guard and all of these things, telling me like I should like them and they're so good for me, and I've hated every single one of them. And so what's wrong with me? And now I have anxiety and I have depression, right? Well, if we had unpacked all of that in the beginning are those actual social objective things that like everyone should like this thing, or is it just a social construct?
Yeah, for sure. And I do think too, like parents are a key part of the process in all of my like stuff too, because teens don't exist in a vacuum, and I genuinely think that there are so many parents who are doing the best they can with the information and the way that they were raised. And so I think a big part of this too is like reducing the shame around like, you have done the best you've been able to do with the knowledge you had at the time, and now we can like move forward with like a diagnosis. We can move forward and kind of learn these things. And I wanted to ask too, because I think that you had made a comment earlier about how like when you get to a certain point working with a teen, that they have all these like diagnoses that kind of follow them. And I think that like as parents and providers, like when you get a new teen into therapy, right, what are the red flags of like, wait a minute, there actually might be neurodivergency that has been missed?
Yes. So a lot of times we'll see things like sensory processing disorder, global delays. ARFID is a big one. Yes, so avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, social anxiety disorder. I've had clients come to me with all 4 of those on board. And like, do you know what happens when we put the puzzle pieces of those 4 things together? So if you have sensory processing delay and a global delay, right, global developmental delay, and ARFID and social anxiety, chances are that we need to be very seriously talking about an autism evaluation at this point. So we'll piecemeal out all of these different things, like, oh, they're very sensitive to food textures. They only have safe foods, right? They're very picky eater. We're going to call it ARFID. They cannot hear me. Right? I say something and there's a significant buffering time between when I say it and when they actually interpret it, right, and react to it. And we'll call it a sensory processing delay. They're very anxious in new social situations and with new people, right? And they'll hide behind my legs, right? And this is beyond the point of time where we would expect that, right, from a developmental perspective. And all of those things in and of themselves, right, they're pieces of the DSM criteria for autism. We just haven't put it all together into one big picture before, right? We've called it all these different things. So I think if you have a child who has some sensory sensitivities, and that's not to say that every child who hates the really loud flushing toilet in a public bathroom is autistic, because it's not. But there certainly are a lot of times where I'll see like a little kid having a meltdown, right, in a public bathroom, like covering their ears, like really like afraid because of the automatic flushing that's happening. And they're like covering their ears and they're kind of rocking a little bit. And I always wonder, I wonder if that child has been assessed for autism, right? Because is that in and of itself diagnostic? No. But it is something that should make us kind of question something, right? We should wonder about that. And sometimes it is just going to be an auditory processing issue, but a lot of times it's not. It is a much bigger picture going on. So I think for me, those are the 4 things that I really tell parents, like, all of those means we need to be a little more curious. That, right? This should invite more curiosity. This should invite more questions. If you see a combination or all four of those things.
Okay. I think that's really helpful because I do think, and again, like I think that as humans in this society right now, we are all doing the best we can do. And I think that, there are often, training differences between mental health programs and whether or not someone got additional training in autism, whatever. And I think that at the same time, I get a lot of teens who have never been assessed, never had the conversation. It's never been even on the plate of possibilities. And so I think it can be a really intimidating conversation to have, but I also, as a therapist, would rather err on the side of caution. And if I have like a curiosity or an inkling, or like maybe this is part of it, I would much rather get someone assessed and have them have answers than to not know and then at 50 be like, oh crap, this has been something I've struggled with my entire life. And so I think part of this rant for me is like, if you have a teen you're working with, if you're a kid you're struggling with, there's literally no harm in getting tested, right?
Right. The worst case scenario is that you come out with more clarity and not an autism diagnosis. And that is not a bad scenario, right? But either way, you're going to come out of that process with a lot more clarity and a lot more insight into yourself. And I think it's worth it, especially if you find a provider who does evaluations, who's neuroaffirming. Everyone has a different style of doing evaluations. I think it's very important to really find that person that you connect with and that you buy into and believe how they do, right, their evaluations. I think that's part of it. But finding a neuroaffirming provider who understands specifically how things manifest in girls and in females, because it is more subtle. We have to ask a lot more questions about things, right? It's not necessarily as right there, you can see it, as you can sometimes in male clients. But I agree with you. I'd rather err on the side of like, hey, do the evaluation. See what happens, right? Than go through life with this giant what if, right? Those giant question marks.
So my experience in referring like people to testing is that the people that truly understand the neurodivergency experience in adolescent teen girls is very, very small. And so I unfortunately have had that experience of like referring people for testing that, like, mind you, I'd be like, you're 100% autistic, right? Like there's no doubt in my mind, right, that this is like not a thing for you. But then the testing comes back and is like, oh, they have like non-typical, like ADHD or things like that where they're skirting around, right, this kind of like other big giant elephant in the room. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like when you have testing that is like that, how do we like take that testing as a data point and not make it the be all end all like I think some people want it to be?
I think we have to remember that any diagnosis we have, it is our attempt as humanity, especially Western humanity, right? Because the DSM is not a universal tool, which we also have to acknowledge. It is culturally based, right? And we have to have cultural intelligence and sensitivity around it. It is a very particular culture's attempt to quantify infinite human experience, because the human experience is truly infinite, right? Any diagnosis in the DSM, we looked at something as humans, and we said, this is slightly outside the realm of what we consider typical. How do we quantify this? It is an ever-changing thing, right? All things in medicine, nothing is ever stamped in stone. We are always learning, we are always growing. And the DSM has changed many times, right? We're on the new revision of version 5. If we looked at DSM, from the early 1920s, we would be horrified, right? Early 1950s, we would be horrified at some of the conceptualizations. And so we have to remember that this is not a perfect science. A lot of it is so subjective. And any diagnosis, right, whether it is social anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder or cyclothymia, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be changeable, right? And how we manifest the symptoms that led to that diagnosis can change. Our experience of those symptoms can change as life changes. And so I strongly encourage everyone to not attach themselves too deeply with their self-identity to that diagnosis, because the diagnosis is only an attempt for us to explain your human experience, which none of us can really know each other's human experience, right? There's no way for me to plug a USB cable into your brain and download the information and interpret it, right? It's based on observations and how we ask the questions. And the criteria are going to change. They just are. They're going to change at some point, right? We've been advocating for how many years to have a complex PTSD diagnosis in the DSM. We don't have it yet. There's an ICD-10 code for it. We can bill for it, but I can't actually diagnose you with it, which is so absurd, right? It's the same thing I think that's going to happen with autism. It's going to shift. It's going to evolve. And so if someone has, and I've seen those reports of, this person has autism-like features, but they don't have autism. Like, what are you talking about? Okay. And so unpacking that with a client of, when I'm sorry you had that experience, it really is an absurd statement for whoever typed that evaluation. That's absurd. But then second, providing a lot of education to clients before you jump into an evaluation, because it is an upfront cost for many people, right? You are investing in this thing. Make sure that you have a provider, not that's going to give you the diagnosis you want, because it does absolutely need to be an objective fit, right, into the diagnostic criteria, but that you're working with someone whose insight and judgment you really trust, right? And so going down like the virtual phone book of providers and finding somebody and just going and making an appointment because that's who takes your insurance and this is what they do, does not mean that that's going to be the right provider for you. And so it takes a little bit of extra research, I think, to find the right person. It takes a little bit of patience, which can be very hard when we want answers and insight right now. And then when we do get that diagnosis or not, right, to not attach our self-identity or self-worth to it. Because if you get evaluated today and you get evaluated in 5 years, that the outcome might be different, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean anyone was wrong before. It just means that either they didn't ask the right questions, they weren't curious enough, right? They didn't know how to interpret the criteria for your experience. And so having a little bit of grace for that, the fact that as providers, we're all people, we're all humans, right? Like there is no gold standard testing. There just isn't.
Well, and I think too, like I always try to say when we're talking about testing is that like this is one person's perception and their combination of the data, right? And so like the people that I have worked with, some of them I had in therapy for 2 and 3 years, right? So like my understanding, my conceptualization of them is so much deeper, and I see them on a weekly basis, right? Versus someone who goes in, they do the intake, they like meet with you for the first time, they like, try to pull different data points from other places of this person's life. But at the end of the day, it really is like, this is one person's assessment, right? And so I think that like, we can take that as in like, oh, they didn't know what they were doing and that's terrible and whatever. We could be like, they had a different perspective of like what you're experiencing and how you worded things. And like, we can take it as data, but it doesn't have to be the Bible.
100%. Absolutely. Like a diagnosis is only as good as how we interpret it as far as our ongoing support system and our ongoing treatment planning, right? I mean, that's really the whole purpose of getting a diagnosis for anything, is how does it support us in getting what we need to live our best lives, right? And so not having a diagnosis, like if you didn't have an official diagnosis of depression, it doesn't mean that you can't go to therapy and take an antidepressant, right? Absolutely, you can still do those things without having an MDD diagnosis. The same thing, if you feel like I really struggle in social situations, I struggle with back and forth conversation, I struggle with emotional reciprocity, but I don't have an official autism diagnosis, does that stop you from seeking support around those challenges? Absolutely not, right? The support needs to be what you genuinely feel you need, irregardless of the diagnosis itself.
I love that, because I do think that like, whether someone agrees with you or not, I think that when we're talking about therapy and people seeking support, we're talking about pain points, and that they're having experiences that are really challenging for them that they want support around.
100%. Psychiatry is very unique within the medical model And that in psychiatry, we are inherently dealing with symptoms, right? And you can talk about integrative psychiatry and functional psychiatry, and there's a lot of discussion around getting to the root cause of things. And some people truly believe that, if we address the root cause of this particular nutritional deficit, for example, we can stop having these symptoms. And there's some connection there, right? Absolutely. But I think that psychiatry is so much more infinite than that, which is what makes it so fascinating, right? In that how our brains experience life, how we interpret our experiences of life, it is unique to every individual, just like our fingerprints. And psychiatry is always going to be dealing with how those things manifest in our lives. It's not like in the medical model, if you have diabetes, right, you have a pancreas that doesn't function properly, I can replace, right, the insulin hormone in your body because your pancreas doesn't function. I'm not necessarily treating the high blood sugar as a symptom, although we should. We're going to treat more the underlying cause, right? We're going to prevent it. In psychiatry, it's different, right? We are dealing with the symptoms. How does this manifest in your life? Because there's no organ I can go in your body and tweak a couple of things and say, aha, you are no longer going to feel anxiety, right? I fixed the anxiety organ. I have adjusted it, right? Yay, we have fixed it. That's not a thing. That's not how it works. It's an ongoing thing.
Oh my God, I'm dead. Sorry. If you could go in and tweak my anxiety organ, I would love that so much.
Right. I found it. There's a hidden organ in our body yet to be identified, the anxiety organ. We can just go in there like an appendix, pop that sucker out, and we're going to feel so much better. That is not how it works in psychiatry, right? It's so much more infinite than that.
No, I love this so much. I'm just going to refer to everything as the
I wish, right? I wish.
But I think that brings up a point too, like when we're talking about like treatment for depression, anxiety, whatever, you could name a lot of different things. I understand that a lot of people, their goal is kind of like, oh, I want to eliminate this, right?
Right. I no longer ever want to be anxious again.
Exactly. And I think that the point is like, I would love for that to be true, right? And I think for some people, they do achieve that, and that's great for them. But I do think when we're talking autism, when we're talking CPTSD, when we're talking those pieces, it's really about like helping to like, minimize symptoms, have the best impact possible on quality of life, access to services, long-term health and wellness, right? Like, we are not going to get rid of autism.
Right. I would even argue, I don't think you can get rid of anxiety, truly. I mean, when you look at the anxiety model, right? We need mild anxiety because it's a motivator, right? Like, mild anxieties can be very functional for us. Like, why do we pay our water bills? Right? Because it's anxious not to do it, right? There's anxiety. We paid it, right? So anxiety can be very functional for us. It's always going to be a spectrum, right? It's when it stops being functional, because a lot of things in psychiatry, how do we measure things and measure diagnoses and measure impact of treatment? It's based on our functionality, right? Like, especially in the Western model of psychiatry, how do we measure suffering and impact on your life? It's based on your functioning, right? At school, work, and relationships. So we're always going to be looking at how can we improve our quality of life, our quality of functioning, our self-empowerment, our self-conceptualization, knowing that you might always feel a little awkward in new social situations or meeting new people. Is that something that is inherently wrong or inherently bad? I don't think so. I think it just is. You might always be anxious picking up the phone and making a phone call, right? Is it inherently bad? Not really. It just is. How does it impact your functioning? Are you still able to pick up the phone and make a phone call when you need to, right? The anxiety in and of itself, not a definition of who you are as a person. It's just a feeling, and feelings can't hurt us. It's very similar across all things. Depression, autism. Feeling awkward has never killed anybody. Ever. Feeling awkward in and of itself is not terminal. It's uncomfortable, right? So how do we come to some level of kind of radical acceptance of, I feel awkward in this situation and that's okay. I can do it anyway. I can be here anyway, right? I felt awkward waving like this to that person. Oh no, I shouldn't have done that. Great. We notice it and we move on from it. It's okay. No one ever died from waving awkwardly at somebody across the room, right? And so that radical acceptance, I think, is a big part of treatment for people that have autism, because we are who we are, right? And so what kind of things about ourselves do we want to change? How much capacity do we have to do that? And how much is it just learning a little bit more self-love and self-grace, that we don't all have to fit into this one like perfect model of how humans behave 24 hours a day.
Well, and I do think that that is one thing where when we have such access to social media nowadays, it looks like everyone's life is great and happy and fun and loving and caring and whatever. And at the end of the day, like when I think about my life on a 24-hour cycle, and I feel so grateful for all of like where I'm at in life and all the connections and the people and my kids and whatever, I think about how many different emotions I feel. And there's probably a lot of them that are positive, and then a lot of them that are like, ooh, that felt gross, or like, that didn't feel good, or I didn't like that, or whatever. And like, but that's not always the stuff that's going on social media. So we have teenagers that had this perception, especially autistic teens, that are like, oh, my life should be good all the time. I should feel good all the time. I can't identify feeling bad because that is not part of the societally acceptable clause.
Yeah, absolutely. Like some of that black and white thinking that is very typical, right, in people on the spectrum can manifest in that way of like, no, everyone else has their act together, right? Everyone else feels good. Like, oh, look at how, look at this wonderful family togetherness, right? I don't have this wonderful family togetherness. I don't have this like ease of popularity or this ease of interaction. Not knowing everything on social media is a lie. Like all of it is inherently such a small representation of life that it is leaving out the other 99.999% of life, right? So it's always going to be a lie of omission, every single thing on social media. And that's okay. Like social media is just like watching like a reality show on television. We know they're scripted. We know they're not really reality shows, right? They're all scripted. Producers are creating these dramatic situations. Social media is the same way. Those people are producing those situations, right? There's a whole lot. Why do so many people on social media have perfect lighting for like this little togetherness? It's not because the lighting was just magically perfect. They're surrounded by lighting apertures that they've spent hundreds of dollars buying, right? Like that is inherently not real life. And so to internalize any of that is setting ourselves up for failure, for sure.
No, for sure. That's one thing that I really appreciated in terms of my own journey with Teens Uncharted, because I see all of those people that are perfect, and I see all these podcasts that are beautiful and gorgeous and whatever, and I'm just like, I want so much to be real, and I also know that if I'm waiting to be perfect, that I'm never going to start. So like,
oh my gosh, absolutely.
I am practicing this entire idea of like, I'm going to present and be and show up where I'm at. And like, if in 10 years I have beautiful lighting, that's whatever, like, great, that's fine.
Great. Yeah.
You know, but I think that is such an important space in terms of like, nothing has to be perfect. Right.
Right. Because nothing actually is perfect.
Right.
Right? Like nothing actually is.
Right.
Yeah, no, I relate to that so much. If we're waiting for it, we're never going to do it.
I know.
Just do it. Do it uncomfortable. Exactly. Do it scared. Just do it.
Do it. Do it grunting. It's okay.
Yeah. As long as we're moving forward, right? There is something beautiful happening there.
Exactly. So I guess in our last few minutes here, do you have any words of encouragement, support, suggestions for parents, providers who are either questioning whether or not their teen daughter might be autistic, or kind of navigating that like new diagnosis?
Yeah. I think for any teens that are listening to this, just know, regardless of diagnosed and not diagnosed, receptive family, not receptive family, your experience is valid. You're a beautiful human being no matter what, and you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. For all providers out there that are kind of wondering about this, I think it's okay to just hit things head on sometimes and to just talk about it. You don't have to skirt around the issue. It's not scary. People with autism are not broken or damaged in any way. Our brains just work a little bit differently. And I encourage everyone, whether you're a teen or a parent or a provider, to really question your own internal biases and held beliefs around autism, because so many people conceptualize it as a global developmental delay or a cognitive delay or a learning disability. And autism is none of those things. It's not. There can be co-occurring with those things, but it's its own separate entity, and the way it manifests has nothing to do with our worth as people and as human beings. So I encourage everyone to just really look deep inside themselves and start getting real curious about what their current beliefs about this are.
I love all of that. I couldn't agree more.
This has been so great, Charity. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for coming on. And Tabitha, real quick, if people want to find you, how do they find you? What do they do? What services can you offer?
Yes. So you can definitely go to my website, onwardgrowthpsychiatry.com. You can check out all of the information I have there. I offer coaching services outside the state of Virginia. Right now I'm doing evaluations just for those in Virginia, but more states are coming in 2026, which is very exciting. So if you're looking for a really neuroaffirming evaluation process, please feel free to email me at hello@onwardgrowthpsychiatry.com, and I'll let you know the timelines for when I might be licensed in your state.
Okay, this is just because I am a little curious and maybe selfish. What are you doing in terms of training for other providers who would want to get more information about how to work with autistic teens?
I'm always open for a consultation and to talk with any of my peers. I'm looking into trying to provide some CEUs. So if anybody is already providing CEUs and would like to partner on creating something like that, that would be phenomenal.
Love that. We have many more things to talk about.
I think so too. That would be so fun. Yes, there's so many things we could unpack.
Yeah, no, there's many, many more. But thank you so much for coming on today. It was such a great conversation. I do hope that people who are listening got something out of it in terms of where they're at in their own journey, how to help really support your teen girls. If you have questions, other feedback, comment, we would both love to hear them. So let us know what you think. But for now, we'll sign off.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.